This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. From heating our homes and powering our vehicles to cell phones, clothing, and medical equipment, oil and natural gas makes everyday life better. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Welcome to the Plain Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Port. Joining me is Chad Oban, who is a fellow. He's been on the podcast before, back when we were doing the live streams. Now we're just doing the audio because, honestly, who wants to look at two chubby bald men talk about nerdy political things? We have a lot going on in our state right now because the legislature's in session, and anytime the legislature's in session, there's a lot going on. We had the big rally that we talked about on yesterday's episode with Tony Bender. But everything at the special session has been really weird. And not just because it's a special session and, you know, they're doing some stuff with joint committees and stuff that they don't normally do. And maybe the general public doesn't realize that that's a little out of, but, you know, a lot of that stuff is just a little not typically how they do things. And that's fine. I guess what's weird is in the new tone, to a lot of this stuff. But before we get to any of that, Chad, let's talk for a minute about Dots Pretzels, which, breaking news, I was just reading Helmut Schmid's article in the Fargo Forum. Hershey, I don't think he needs any introduction, purchases Dots Pretzels, which doesn't surprise me. It's a awesome product, awesome line of products, an awesome North Dakota company. But they bought Dots Pretzels based out of Velva, North Dakota, 22 miles to the southeast of me, where I'm at in Minot. Bought Dots Pretzels for $1.2 billion, Chad. Are you surprised? $1.2 billion.
You know, as a fellow fat, bearded guy, chubby, did we say chubby before?
Chubby. That's fat. Fat, I feel, is not, I don't know. That's
okay. So I'm gonna go with chubby, bearded guys rather than bald guys. Bald guys too obvious for me. I know a lot about snacks, and I know that the Dots Pretzels are excellent. Good for them. I mean, a real North Dakota company that I think they just basically started seasoning these pretzels, in their house, and they expanded to something that's, am I surprised that it sold for $1.2 billion? I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much a snack company should sell for, but good for them and good for North Dakota and good for Velva.
I mean, it's just a cool story. Like, that's kind of the entrepreneurial, right? I mean, it just checks so many boxes for me. I mean, it's North Dakota. I love North Dakota. And I love watching North Dakotans succeed. And then it was just, somebody started a business in their kitchen. I remember when I first saw them in a gas station, and the Dots Pretzels were in a packaging that was maybe a step or two up from Ziploc bags. I mean, it was real homemade type stuff to begin with. And now they're, and
I think they were like a big Pride of Dakota company, right? I mean, I assume they were at all those different shows and probably got some help from the state. But I remember the first time you started hearing stories about, God, I saw Dots Pretzels in Minneapolis, and then I saw them in New York, and then I saw them in this place, and it just sort of took off. So,
which is just a North Dakota thing. Like we're titillated anytime we see something from North Dakota in some other part of the. I remember when they used to have a big Cloverdale meat sign in the Seattle Mariners Stadium. In fact, because I think they provided all the hot dogs or something, and it's like, look,
they do. Seattle serves Cloverdale.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, all right, so let's talk politics. I mean, we've talked about the rally and everything. Any thoughts on that? What did you see?
No, I mean, anytime you can get crowds from 300 to 1,000. To come out on a Monday afternoon. I mean, it's relatively impressive, but I think one of the things those folks probably learned is maybe lowering expectations a little bit.
When you come out saying that you're gonna have dozens of porta potties and thousands of T-shirts, I mean, when you set the expectations that high, even a good. I mean, what they got was a good crowd size. I mean, you could call that a success, just in terms of butts and seats, but. They set the expectation at 3,000, and when they didn't hit it, then it kind of looks like a fail.
Right, and I said one of the things that I thought was interesting as I was watching the Technical Corrections Committee online. as the rally was finishing, and a big group came in and were listening to a bill that had to do with cybersecurity curriculum for public schools, right? Not anything they're particularly interested in. And Judy Lee, the chair, said, hey, there's too many people in here. Could some people go out to the crowd and listen to this,
and then it was kind of like, no, respect us, or
and they started yelling at Judy Lee, and I mean, it wasn't even. And then you could just see the crowd slowly trickling out after that once they figured out, oh, this isn't something we're necessarily interested in. But their gut response was just so much anger towards elected officials. So I don't know what they accomplished. I mean, I think they're going to get something out of this session in terms of vaccination mandates and CRT, but I think those things would have happened with or without the rally.
Well, I think we could also, yeah. I mean, in some ways, I think they're doing themselves more harm than good, because they come in and they act like bullies, and they're not respectful. I mean, when you're at the legislature, I mean, it's hard. I mean, there's a lot of passionate people who are at the legislature. There's a lot of passionate people who come to the legislature. And there's always like a very studied decorum. And maybe that comes off weird to people in the general public who are maybe used to talking about politics on Facebook or whatever, but they do it for a reason, because you have to work together, right? Like they're in these rooms, they have to work together. So, they work very hard to make sure when we're talking to each other, it has to be polite. It has to be professional, right? You don't have to like each other, but you have to be at least cordial. Which I guess brings us to an incident that happened yesterday. There was a floor debate in the House over the redistricting bill. And I want to get into the redistricting bill a little bit, because I think what we're doing with sub-districts is absolutely weird, and I don't understand it. But before we get there, the redistricting map, there's a group of Bastiat caucus lawmakers. That's kind of the far-right caucus. They're very much aligned with the people who held the rally. I mean, that's kind of that faction of the Republican Party that is splitting in a lot of ways, I think, from the mainstream Republican Party. And so they're having this debate, and they're kind of not happy because the map, in particular, District 26, they kind of redraw it so that District 26 is all within Richland County, which in the two redistricting processes that I've now observed, that's something that they really strive for. If they could put a legislative district all within the bounds of a county like that, that just makes life easier. If the population works out right, it's really beneficial, for the lawmakers, and I think for the people there as well. But the three people who are in District 26 are all members of the Bastiat caucus. Sebastian Ertelt, Kathy Scraw, they're both representatives, Senator Jason Heitkamp. So they're upset about this. So there's been a big push. Sebastian Ertelt, Representative Ertelt, had an alternative map, and that got voted down, and they're unhappy. They don't think the process was fair. So yesterday, and I have video. I have a column about this up if you want to see the video. Yesterday, Representative Jeff Hoverson from Minot, who couldn't attend the rally, by the way, he organized because he got the anti-vax rally because he got COVID. He said, basically, he asked if he could ask Majority Leader Chet Pollard, Republican from Carrington, a question. And Pollard said, yes, you can. And then he said, do you feel the process was fair? And Representative Pollard said, yeah. And then, Representative Hoverson continued to speak and kind of just said, I expect the Majority Leader to have more spine. And if you're watching the video, you can kind of see everybody. Like, mostly you see Speaker of the House Kim Koppelman, and even he was kind of like, what?
Yeah. But I think, Rob, this is a perfect example of sort of how things are changing in the legislature. I mean, I just having some conversations this morning that even just several years ago, 3 sessions ago, right, this kind of stuff wouldn't happen. I mentioned to you before we came on air, I couldn't imagine a scenario where a relatively new backbencher legislator would have called Al Carlson spineless, and that would have been acceptable. I also think about the difference between the House and the Senate. If somebody did that to Rich Wardner, both sides would have come unglued yesterday. And it's just sort of the change in tone and the change in the way we treat each other. And it's not just in the legislature, right? It's everywhere. It's the fact that you and I having this conversation coming from different sort of backgrounds and ideologies, somehow weird. So I was, I'm not one to clutch my pearls. But I was sort of taken aback by Hoverson's comment yesterday. And it made it even more bizarre because he was on the big screen, right? He wasn't even in the chamber as he called Chet Pollard spineless. And I got it. Chet Pollard has the worst job in North Dakota politics right now, trying to maneuver his way through this special session with what's going on in the House. And I think he's a stand-up guy who's been a legislator for a long time.
I mean, and you pick any lawmaker, in Bismarck, and I think you and I are both going to find some criticisms maybe of the way they voted, except in your case, maybe Senator Oban, you keep those criticisms to yourself.
No, Rob, that's not true. I've actually lobbied her on a couple of things where she went the opposite way. And I told her that Senator Pullman and Senator Bell were actually my favorite legislators for that day because they voted right. It was a sports gambling thing. That I wanted her to vote on a few sessions ago.
Anyway, okay, that aside, my point is Majority Leader Pollard, whatever you think, I mean, is a gentleman, and really does a good job. I think that and the interesting thing is that like I kind of saw that happen and was kind of like, whoa, I wasn't really going to write anything about it, and then Representative Hoverson called me at like 9:00 last night, or not, I shouldn't say, I think it was like 8:00. Called me and was like, hey, I just want to let you know I might be censured for that thing. And I was like, okay. And I took some quotes down, and then I called Majority Leader Pollard. And what he said I thought was really interesting. And I don't know that I put this quote, I quoted him in the column. I don't know that I put this quote in. But he said, basically told me that he wasn't planning on doing anything. As far as he was concerned, the issue was over, which surprised me because in the past, somebody jabbing the majority leader like that would have elicited more of a response than that. But the interesting thing that Pollard told me was, he says, I'm still kind of sick over what happened with Luke Simons. And by that, he was very careful. He told me it was the right thing. And Luke Simons, of course, was the Bastiat Caucus member. He was expelled during the regular session after multiple accusations of harassment came forward. He was expelled by the rest of the legislature. Pollard said absolutely believes that was the right thing. But he said he's still sick over it. And I think that's just, I think what he's speaking to there is such a divide in the Republican Party, and there is so much hostility there. I think what he's saying is, it's not a big enough issue for me to fight at this point.
And I also think Chet Pollard is at the position where he just wants to get the session done, right? He wants to continue moving it along. To spend 2 or 3 hours on should we censure somebody for calling him a name isn't something that Chet probably has time for right now. I mean, I think he's really focused. They're about to spend $1 billion, right, and do this redistricting thing. He's probably got bigger things to worry about than if Jeff Hoverson called him spineless or not.
I think. Listen. In any other context, I would say yes, censure it, because getting back to my point, the decorum, and not because I want to be petty or score points and dunk on Jeff Hoverson. The decorum in that chamber is important. It is so hard. It is. You have everybody looking in. There's cameras everywhere now, which is a good thing because the public can watch and follow along. But let's face it, there's the C-SPAN effect where everybody's kind of grandstanding for the cameras now. It is already so difficult in that environment. You have to enforce politeness. Like it has to be something that's taken seriously. But in this context, I think Pollard's right. I mean, do you pick that fight? And do you have another big floor debate and people are quoting Mason's rules and everything like, oh, you can't censure him and we've got to start a committee and an investigation and everything. I mean, that's what it would turn into.
Right.
And then you would have...
And you don't have to investigate if Hoverson called him spineless or not.
It was on the floor.
But you're right.
Right. I know. That's what it become. And I think Pollard's just... We're in special session. The last thing we want is this to turn into because there's some people that want this to turn into a runaway session. I mean, you had that group of lobbyists, which I think I sort of made a crack. Like if the lobbyists are telling the lawmakers to keep it on the rails, right? Like that's like if the lobbyists, and as I say to somebody who lobbies, but and I'm not trying to be disparaging to lobbyists, but that's just like, fellas, let's focus here.
Rob, you don't have to convince me that lobbyists think the legislative session is the greatest time of the year.
Right.
I'm not one of those lobbyists who feels that way. I feel like it's often the worst time of the year. But no, lobbyists love this. And so, but I think they also had they knew things that they were going to deal with in the special session weren't going to be good, right? They weren't going to be things that we weren't going to be having conversations about the childcare crisis in North Dakota and what that means for workforce. We weren't going to be having conversations about like big issues about what's going on in our schools and our hospitals and all those things. They knew it was going to be people trying to score political points, which is exactly what we're seeing here. So I assume all those lobbyists and those interest groups they knew nothing good would come from a runaway session.
Yeah, and let's be honest, like special sessions should be about special situations. Redistricting obviously is a unique situation that happens every 10 years. It's got to be addressed. The quote unquote Biden bucks, the federal funding that came in. Again, I mean, if the legislature doesn't act, then the money either just sits there until the next session in 2023, or the executive branch appropriates it, which I don't think is constitutional. So those are two things legislature needs to do. That's their jobs. They needed to come into special session. The rest of this stuff, one of the reasons why I don't want to open the can of worms, not just because I'm limited government and I don't really want the government to govern extraneously. The other thing is it's really hard. I mean, some of the professional groups like the Chamber of Commerce, whatever, they have full-time people. They can go down and lobby whenever they want. A lot of the interest groups are not that well funded. A lot of the people who work them are volunteers. And all of a sudden they have to scramble and find their way to Bismarck and testify in this very chaotic special session. Leave the regular policy stuff to the regular session that has all the regular protocols, all the regular notices. Everybody knows when it is. Everybody knows when it's going to happen. Leave it there. Don't do this stuff in special session.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think trying to, even just watching the Technical Corrections Committee this morning, they were doing some work on a couple of bills, and they were in session till 11 o'clock last night. And then this morning, they're trying to figure out where amendments are and whatever. And I think chaotic is exactly the right word, because I think they're now dealing with, is it like 11 bills outside of the scope of the Biden bucks and redistricting?
I'm trying to think of what came out of. I think 8 came out of out of the House delayed bills,
and then 3 came out of the floor yesterday.
Yeah, that's right. So and then 1 came out of the Senate delayed bills. That was like a small technical correction to a scholarship bill or something, I think, if I'm remembering right. I think that was Senator Pullman.
That's exactly right. Yep.
Yeah. So what's that? A dozen? I think that's a dozen.
Yeah. And some of them are, like there's a House bill and a Senate bill on eliminating Social Security tax. They're the exact same bill that came off the floors yesterday. So that'll be sort of, pushed together into sort of one hearing. I would imagine they don't need to have 2 bills. But I still go back to, really focusing on the things that matter, that we have Biden bucks, that we, $1 billion, that seems like a heavy enough lift. And I'll give the legislature some credit for the process they went through to put together their plan. Do they have different priorities than I would have? Absolutely. I think we should be talking more about childcare and some of the things that affect working families. I think there's a drop in the bucket that's been put into a systematic problem how far removed are you from paying for childcare?
Not removed at all. I have a 6-year-old.
Yeah. And so how expensive and hard it is. And so I think that at some point we need to get serious about this from a working family point of view, but also from a business point of view.
And I think that's a good debate to have. I think there's things we can do it. Like part of it is looking how hard it is with all the different regulations, how hard it is for somebody to start a childcare business.
Let me talk about one of the regulations that the YMCA asked for them to look at during this special session is background checks. I didn't realize this, but if you do a background check in North Dakota on an employee, it takes 2 weeks to get it back.
Yeah.
In Minnesota, it takes a half a day.
Yeah.
So let's say you're running a daycare, which is already understaffed. You have somebody quit. It's literally impossible for a daycare not to have a hole in their staffing because of the background checks. That's
because no matter even by the time you find a candidate and you decide this is the person I think I would like to hire, they can't start working until 2 weeks later. And then if the background check kicks something back, you got to start over again.
You start over.
So there's stuff like that I think people think about childcare immediately thinking, oh, they're just asking to appropriate a bunch more money. I think there's things we could do without even really spending money. I
might disagree. I think we should spend money. I
okay.
think we're really going to do this.
But
we need to figure out how to pay staff.
Sure, but I think in the context of this, that debate should be had during the regular session, not the special session. I'm not one of these people. Every legislative session, I hear people complain, "Oh, all these waste of time bills, we're wasting all this time." I tend to take a very expansive view of that. If we're gonna have an open process, then you have to accept that a lot of people you disagree with are also going to want to engage in that process. So what you and I might think of as a stupid waste of time bill is clearly important to somebody. It's their process too. They're allowed to bring that bill. But that's what the regular session is for. The special session is a special set of circumstances, and it's not a free-for-all. And it really worries me that we have all these conservatives that want to just, right? It used to be the conservative was that old, well, I think it's a Mark Twain quote, where like nobody's life, liberty, or property is safe when the legislature's in session. That used to be the conservative view, but now conservatives want this runaway session on critical race theory and everything else.
Well, and I think it's really interesting the way the Senate delayed bills committee handled things. I mean, people like Senator Bell, straightforward. The session's about spending this money and redistricting. Even if they're things I support, I'm voting against them. Jerry Klein, basically the exact same thing. The House was a little bit different. It was just like depending on the issue, if they liked it or not, they would move it forward. But on the Senate, there's a few. Well,
if you watch, there were two members of the House Delayed Bills Committee that moved a lot of those forward, and it was Representative Koppelman and Representative Kim Koppelman, also Speaker of the House, and Representative Scott Lauser, who are very simple. I like Scott Lauser quite a bit, but they are. In fact, Scott is actually my lawmaker. I'm his constituent, but they took a bit. I think they liked a lot of the issues and they moved them forward for that, and I think that was very unfortunate.
Well, and I think it was really interesting that, again, going back to Representative Pollard, he was the one that was always the swing vote on those things, and so they've put their leader in this position where he has to take tough votes that are going to make some of the base angry. It was a tough situation.
I got to look at my notes again, but a couple of them didn't even get motions in the committee. Representative Richter's bill on regulating human behavior didn't even get a motion. Ertelt's bill didn't get a motion on the banning the vax mandate, no motion. So some of that stuff was kind of interesting to watch.
I thought that was interesting as well, because the Senate actually moved do not passes on everything. Yeah. The House clearly had the attitude that there's some of these things we don't even want to take a vote on. Let's just put them to the side, and if nobody moves them, they die on the bottom.
Right. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Now let's talk about one of the issues that is the reason why we've talked about all the things that they're doing during the special session that they probably shouldn't be. Let's talk about redistricting, which is the most important thing that they're doing down there right now. The House passed a redistricting plan that goes to the Senate now. Do you understand this subdividing legislative districts thing? I understand some people think subdividing all of the legislative districts. I know there's people who are pushing for that. They think it's I don't think that would make a lick of difference at all. I think there might be some geographical weirdness with some of the House lawmakers, but I don't care, right? If you want to subdivide the legislative districts for the House districts, that's fine. And just for people who don't understand this, North Dakota, currently we elect 3 at-large lawmakers, a senator and 2 representatives from every legislative district. They all get elected to 4-year terms. Subdividing, what we're talking about, would subdivide the district for the House. So the senator would still be elected from the entire district, and then there would be a line drawn, and there would be 2 sub-districts, and then those sub-districts would each vote for a House member. So I could understand. I am completely ambivalent in the idea of subdividing all the legislative districts. I don't care. I don't see. I'm opposed to it only insofar as I don't understand the problem we're trying to solve, and I'm not in favor of doing things that I don't think are going to accomplish anything. So, but I don't care. What this redistricting map did is it subdivided 2 legislative districts, District 9 and District 4, and the reason why is because those are 2 districts that encompass Native American communities, the Turtle Mountain Reservation and the Fort Berthold Reservation, 3 affiliated tribes. And so the idea is if by subdividing it, we give them a better shot at electing somebody. I kind of recoil at that because I think our politics are already balkanized enough. I didn't think we were supposed to be drawing political boundaries to try to produce specific political outcomes. I don't understand that to begin with. But the insistence is that the Voting Rights Act and all this court precedent and what, South Dakota had a very lengthy and expensive legal battle over this. And so the idea is North Dakota has to subdivide these districts in order to make the courts happy and to satisfy the Voters' Rights Act. And I'm looking at it thinking, well, if you subdivide District 4, but you don't subdivide District 5, where I live, I get to vote for 3 lawmakers. The people in District 4 get to vote for 2. How does that help the Native American community there? They get to vote for 1 less elected representative of the legislature. And 2, how is that fairness under the law? We're all supposed to be treated equally under the law, but some people can vote for fewer elected officials than others? That makes no sense to me.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to say that I am a huge proponent of subdivisions across the whole state. I think that's the best way to take care of this stuff. And the reason for it, from my perspective, is it leads to better elections. I think it leads to more scrutiny put on individual legislators rather than a slate of candidates. If I can run one-on-one against Rob Port, I would prefer that versus Democrats A and B versus Republicans A and B.
They're still going to run as slates.
Well, maybe they'll choose to do that, but as an individual candidate, and if I'm a Democrat, Rob, I'm not running as a slate in the vast majority of these districts. If I'm running against one, it's much easier to take on somebody as an individual than as a party, if I'm a member of a party whose brand is where the Democrat brand is in the state. And so I think it leads to better legislators. I believe that. You might disagree based on
I don't think it's gonna. I just don't think it's gonna. I had somebody yesterday told me that it was gonna help get money out of legislative races, and I said, you were kidding yourself.
Yeah, I disagree with that.
I think everybody's kidding themselves that this is going to change anything. I don't see a particular problem with the way we're doing things now. I think that I think sometimes, and I'm not trying to throw a sharp elbow here or anything, but I think sometimes Democrats in North Dakota they spend a lot of time talking about gerrymandering and all these other structural things as an explanation for why so many North Dakotans aren't voting Democrat. And I would argue that it has more to do with message and policy and cultural issues than it does with the structure of the political process. And I don't even know if that's why. I don't think you're supporting it just to elect more Democrats.
No, I think having a mano match is better than having a slate versus a slate. I think you end up, and then the top 2 vote getters. So then you have people voting bullets when there's 4 candidates, and you're sort of running against your running mate. I think it just adds some weirdness to an election. I too agree with you that Democrats often look at structural changes as the reason why we're losing in states
because
like
it's
North
easier than admitting they just don't like our message.
I will tell you the only structural change that will dramatically change the outcomes in the state of North Dakota is if we made every race nonpartisan. That's the only structural change, and that ain't happening anytime soon.
And I mean, maybe it would for people who don't. And I think sometimes we tend to forget how many people don't really pay attention. They just kind of show up on election day and start looking for partisan affiliation.
Right.
That's very, very common. Whereas, because I'm going to know that guy's a Republican, even if it's not on the ballot.
But I think if you remove the D and the R, you probably have 5 to 10 points, or maybe even more than that.
I think you're going to have it's going to be the same people who aren't going to inform themselves on the candidates, except now they're just going to vote randomly because they don't have the partisan affiliations. I mean,
but randomly, or maybe the name that they recognize or the person that they know at church that they like,
because that's better. If you know the person, that's obviously better than not knowing the person and voting randomly. But
Rob, I've told you before, if you want to take shots at the intelligent of voters in the state, you go ahead and do that. But I'm not going to follow you down that path.
I'm a devoted disciple of H.L. Mencken. This says a democracy is the collective belief in democracy is the belief in the collective wisdom of individually stupid people. That's basically where I am. Which I think is why I'm struggling so much with the Trump movement and this populist shift in the Republican Party, because I don't believe I believe in democracy. Don't get me wrong. I think the people have to be there as a check, But this idea that we're going to legislate at the ballot box and that the people are all wise, no, the people often vote for very stupid things. Often the people in the aggregate want completely contradictory things. They want low taxes, which are always, tax cuts are always popular, but they also want a lot of spending in a lot of different areas. And hey, the government delivers it and we run massive, massive budget deficits.
Well, but in North Dakota, we don't have massive budget deficits.
Well, we can't.
But we've been able to do those things, right? I mean, you want to talk about why the Republican Party?
Yeah, that's easy. That's easy to do with oil money, right? That's where
cut your taxes and give you more services. That's a winning political argument every single time.
Absolutely,
and we've been able to do it with oil. But going back to sub districts, because
I always laugh too. Just to add on to that, people always talk about people have this love affair with like the Scandinavian states. Like, oh, look at how Norway does everything. Norway has a state-owned oil company and a massive sovereign wealth fund. And a very small, relatively homogenous population. So yes, give America those things, and we can also be Norway.
Yes. Well, North Dakota could be Norway. I think we fit some of those things.
Our legacy fund's not quite as big as theirs.
Not quite as big. But going back to sub-districts, and I'm not going to pretend for 1 second to be an attorney or an expert on the Voting Rights Act or any of that kind of stuff. But it's my understanding the two things that are illegal when dealing with minority populations is you can't pack. So that means you can't, like we've seen across the country where they put all African Americans into one district. So then the African American community gets one elected official, and you can't spread them out so much that they're diluted to the point where they have no influence or that in there. And I think that's what the legislature is trying to avoid. Again, I'm not going to pretend to be a lawyer here. I don't know how this subdivision, I think from a partisan point of view, I think you might end up with 2 and 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, which is what we have now. But I think you're going to have one of each in 9.
As a partisan exercise, I don't think it makes a difference. If you subdivide District 4, that's all Republicans now. I think you have a pretty good chance you're going to elect a Democrat there where you didn't have one before. But District 9 is all Democrats. You subdivide District 9, you're probably going to elect a Republican up there.
Agree. I think it's politically speaking. So, the one thing that I've been sort of watching this, and again, I support subdivisions, have for decades. I also think it makes rural districts smaller. I think that's helpful as another point. You saw farmers.
But that's not subdividing all the districts, not on the table. We're talking about subdividing 2 districts.
Yep. No, I understand. So one of the things I've not liked during this conversation, and it seems like the primary reason why people are saying we should do this is just the fear of lawsuit. I think there probably are some reasons to do it. Again, I'm proponent of across the whole state to do this because I think it takes away some of the concerns that you've expressed about treating a voter in District 5 different than a voter in District 4.
I would sue if this is the play. If they end up just subdividing 2 districts, and I was from one, I would absolutely sue. That is not fair.
But Rob, I think what you have on the other side, and I think this is what we heard during the conversation, is if you have more people looking for lawsuits around Voting Rights Act. So, maybe in the past we got away with doing this because nobody is willing to sue. It seems like now there's going to be a lawsuit.
Somebody did sue last time, and the court said that we didn't have to sub. The reason why we weren't violated is the tribal populations at Turtle Mountain. We didn't have any tribal the tribes didn't have enough population, basically, put it that way. That's obviously changed. North Dakota's population overall has gone up. The populations in those tribal communities has gone up. So it's a different ball game now. So I understand all that, but that's really the expectation. Like I was watching Representative Devlin, who I have just a huge amount of respect for. I love Bill Devlin, but he was on the floor insisting over and over again, this is what the Voting Rights Act requires. This is what court precedent requires. And I'm thinking to myself, the Voting Rights Act is going to promote equality by making it so that people in District 4, including the people living in the Native American communities, can vote for one less member of the legislature than people in every other district except for District 9. That's not an equal outcome. That's worse.
Yeah, again, as I said at the beginning, I'm not an expert on the Voting Rights Act and how this plays out. I mean, I think clearly some of these legislators have been talking to folks at a national level and from other states and NCSL and other places who have warned them that this is what's going to take place here.
I mean, the thing is sometimes when we're having these debates, we treat the courts like they're infallible, and maybe sometimes they can feel that way because when the court rules, it's kind of hard to get around it, right? Like if the court says something's unconstitutional, the legislature kind of doesn't have any other I guess maybe amend the Constitution or something, but that's really hard to do. But I can't, like, if that's actually what the courts are requiring, then the courts are wrong, right? Like, and maybe I'm making like a broader philosophical argument, but if that's the expectation, is that we have some legislative districts, some people with less political representation than others, then that's wrong. The courts are absolutely wrong. They got their heads up their rear ends, and we shouldn't abide by it. And
you alluded to this earlier, but South Dakota has been running this exact program, right? With a couple, they have 2 districts that are subdivided down there.
I think that's right. One. I think one around Standing Rock and then Pine Ridge, maybe. I don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah, I shouldn't
guess.
I don't know the reservations in South Dakota well enough. If Cheyenne River, maybe. There's several. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting if people from District 4 and Terry Jones and others, sue. I think the other thing that during redistricting and going back to what Hoverson said, Hoverson's whole point is redistricting should protect incumbents. And I think that's about the worst rationale for drawing lines. I think this committee actually did a pretty good job of drawing lines. I mean,
there's quite a few incumbents, some of whom have been there for a long time. Now, the thing is kind of like, well, a lot of those incumbents are probably going to retire. And as a matter of fact, I know that many of them are. But also, if they were able to do that and were able to just kind of draw out, I guess, people who were probably going to leave anyway, I don't really have a problem with that. Like, okay, great.
Yeah. And, going back to District 26, I mean, the fact that they could draw a district that's Richland County in its entirety, why wouldn't they do that? If you can have District 25 be the entirety of Richland County, of course you should do
26,
that. And,
yeah,
well, 25 is Richland County.
Okay, right, yeah.
To the west of there.
That's right.
But yeah, I think it puts Scrow and Heitkamp into 25. Well, this isn't about Scrow and Heitkamp. This should be about the voters and how to have the best representation. And I got a kick out of Ertelt and others talking about disenfranchising voters because Ertelt doesn't get to stay in his seat. That's not disenfranchising voters. I mean, they still get to vote for their legislators.
Sebastian Ertelt could still run for the legislature. He just might not be from the same district.
Yeah. And it'll be kind of fun to watch Kiefert and Christensen and Ertelt run against each other in 24.
If Kiefert's not, I wonder how the recall for Kiefert's going. I haven't checked in on that.
So how about the recall on Governor Burgum? Any word on how that's going?
I don't think it's going very well at all. Although Michael Coachman did speak after the at the big reception after the rally, where a Minot area district chairman kind of went off on me a little bit. The whole room was cheering anti-Rob Port stuff.
It was actually Democrats have been waiting for that moment for a decade now, Rob, where there's a group of people chanting down your name.
I just didn't think it was going to be a group of Republicans. Like
yeah, I mean,
I will say, like, there's a part of me, I don't go into this business to try to make people mad. I think some people do. They like to provoke outrage. Listen, I'm going to tell you what I think, and if it makes you mad, tough. But I don't particularly want to make people mad. I don't really have any animus towards people. I guess, I'm just, if they think that they're gonna shout me down or whatever, because I have Scott Hennon taking shots at me on Facebook and everything else. I'm just not gonna follow them down the road they're going. I'm as conservative as I've ever been. But if they're on this populist road with election conspiracies and anti-vax stuff or whatever, it's not going there. Not going to do it.
So, Rob, let me ask you this. Watching that video of the guy from Minot going off.
Jay Lundeen, he's the District 40 chairman, just to be clear who we're talking about.
There was a professional wrestler feel to it. I mean, the way he kept calling you brother. I mean, it had a Randy Macho Man Savage feel to his presentation. Yeah. And, getting the crowd involved and whatever. I talked to somebody afterwards, and I was like, I don't know why he kept calling Rob, hey, brother. throughout the whole thing.
I don't know.
It was
so
interesting.
When he called me a few weeks ago, he wanted me to come participate in a Republican fundraiser for participated for the Minot area Republicans, and he wanted me to be in a dunking booth where people would pay some amount of money. I think he said like $300, and they get like 5 throws to dunk me in the dunking booth. Which I actually took as a compliment. Like, I'm commanding the big bucks, right? Like, that's a lot of money to spend to just dunk me in water.
Money's different in Republican politics than Democrat politics.
Yeah. So he kept calling me brother when he called me there too, which I thought was a very, very weird thing. But there's a very weird dynamic going on. I mean, there's a lot of Republicans, at the end of this special session, we're probably going to see a resignation from a Republican lawmaker that I think is probably going to make some headlines.
A resignation?
An announced retirement. I keep using that word resignation. Obviously, I'm going to finish the term, but it announced I'm not running again.
I get the sense up there that there's a lot of people who are struggling this week.
There's a lot of people who've been struggling since the last session. I mean, everything got so tight with the Luke Simons being expelled, and then all of these culture war issues. I have long argued, and I think you've even agreed with me on this, that the key to the Republican Party's success in North Dakota has been pragmatism. They don't really get caught. I mean, sometimes they go through the motions of some of the stuff, but the people who have really been in charge, who have been in leadership, don't often get sucked into this culture war stuff. They're very, very pragmatic. I think over the years.
They also discovered oil, and they've been able to give tax cuts while providing more services. That's a pretty except political story.
I would also point out that the Republicans were dominating well before the oil boom happened. So
we had 3 Democrats in Washington. That was a little bit different at that point.
Yeah, but we also had. I mean, when was the last time we elected a Democrat as governor?
I think we could go even for
when was the last time we had a Democratic majority in either house of the legislature? I mean, that was 90s.
91, I think.
94, 93. I can't remember now. It was the 90s.
It was early 90s, and it was the Senate by one seat.
That's well before the oil boom. I'm talking about the success. Like Ed Schaefer, like a lot of that success was not built on oil boom money. I mean, maybe more recently.
The maintenance has been, though. I mean, that certainly
the longevity has helped. What's been happening with national Democrats hasn't helped either on the other side of that spectrum.
Right.
But my point is, I do think that there's been a pragmatism there where you look at somebody like John Hoeven was not afraid to spend money, so much so that I made my bones criticizing that. I mean, just massive increases. So I don't know. There was a pragmatism there. They didn't get bogged down, and I think that's the divide. Is you have these very pragmatic, serious-minded Republicans. I mean, even maybe if you don't like the policies they're promoting or whatever, I think you could call them serious-minded people. And now you have people who only want to do reactionary stuff, who only want to be reacting to the latest outrage of the day.
So, Rob, I think it's interesting watching sort of the quote normal Republicans or the historical Republicans,
mainstream, traditional, whatever you want to call them.
Mainstream, try to sort of maneuver their way through what's going on here. And I think they have made mistakes. I think that sort of throwing bones periodically to the Bastiat has not calmed them down. It's made them feel more empowered.
Whetted their appetite.
Right. And I think about it as, and I don't mean this to be as demeaning as it may sound. It's like dealing with a toddler, right? I give my 5-year-old 15 minutes of screen time. He's not ending that 15 minutes saying, "Thank you, Father, for giving me 15 minutes. He wants 15 more minutes of screen time then.
Yeah.
And that's what it sort of feels like, right? It felt like with the mask mandate last session. Now we're on a vaccination mandate.
Well, even before that, we had the food freedom stuff, which generally, I mean, I'm not real in favor of. I mean, generally, I think you should eat what you want to eat, and I think as long as you understand what you're putting in and the process behind it, and we have some pretty rigorous labeling stuff, eat what you're going to eat, right? Like I grew up going to like church potlucks and stuff. Nobody was inspecting Granny's goulash. before everybody ate it. So I don't like, I understood where they were coming from, but like the militancy with which they pursued that was surprising and weird. And you look at that, I mean, that issued a lot of the roots of what we're going through now. Like, that was kind of the people, they were coming up, and boy, you're right. I think there's been efforts to placate them, and it just didn't.
And I think we're seeing that again in this special session by allowing a CRT bill to go through, allowing a vaccination mandate bill to go through. And I understand, I understand what they're trying to do. I just don't think it's an effective strategy to accomplish their goals and to get us ultimately back to a place that we discussed earlier, where there's decorum, there's respect, there's conversation going on. I don't think this gets us there.
And to be clear, I don't have a problem debating the critical race theory stuff or curriculum in schools. We've been doing this since we've had school boards, right? I mean, we were doing this, inherit the win, and should evolution be taught? Should we have prayer in school? This stuff's not new.
Right.
And we have these processes in place so that they provide venues to debate them. The problem is this very strident, I have to win at all costs. And if you win, then it must be a conspiracy. Or I want to get back to where if I lose the political debate, it's just because I didn't persuade enough people. And if I want to win in the future, then I need to go back to the drawing board, and I need to figure out how to do better arguments, how to gather better evidence or whatever to support my position. Now it's, if I didn't win, it's because of some conspiracy and somebody paid off somebody else.
And I'll tell you that this morning, Shannon Rohrs on the CRT thing tried to make the point that we should study this. We're coming back in 13 months. We can figure out what we need to do from a policy perspective. But it's, and I agree, we can have these conversations. I mean, you and Dan Kahn had a conversation about CRT months and months and months ago, right? On air. Yeah. And it seemed to me like it was a real good conversation about what's actually being taught, what's not being taught, what do we need to do here?
I mean, conservatives shouldn't be afraid. I mean, supposedly, it used to be conservatives, hung their hats on, the facts don't care about your feelings, right? Except now, a lot of conservatives have turned into snowflakes where they're afraid, like, oh, don't teach something that might. Listen, America's got ugly things in its history. That doesn't mean America's not a great country, or that we haven't had wonderful aspirations and in a lot of ways met those aspirations. It just means there are some ugly parts, and not every American experience is the same. And those other perspectives are as important as your perspective and should be taught. I don't have a problem with that. But as far as the debate goes, if the legislature is going to dip its toes into curriculum, then there better be a rigorous process, and there better be a regular legislative session where educators and parents and school officials and people like North Dakota United and everybody else who's got a stake in that can come forward and engage, and hopefully at the end of it we'll make some good policy.
And based on fact, right? I mean, I think that's the other thing that's really been a struggle. I mean, I watched the hearing on one of the ivermectin bills the other day, and it was just like a litany of, these are things I've seen on the internet, right? And some of it might be true, some of it's not true, but much of it is not fact checked. And for some reason, it's like those non-facts are legitimized in the same way as, thousands and thousands and thousands of medical doctors. And you and I have talked about this before, that you're maybe a little bit more questioning of experts when it comes to this kind of stuff. But I don't think some dude writing on the internet should have the same juice with the legislature as thousands and thousands of doctors, right? Yeah. And I think we need to get back.
I mean, personally, I listened to my doctor. I mean, when I was going to get my vaccine, and part of my worry is I'd had COVID. It was very bad for me. At that point, the vaccines were just coming out. I didn't know, but I talked to my doctor, right? I read articles. I look at the source. Some guy works at the National Institutes of Health is going to carry some weight with me, right? I mean, I respect stuff like that, and it doesn't make me a sheeple. It makes me a rational human being who can look and say, I think that this person who has a long career working in epidemiology, I'm going to take their opinion more than some, mom with a Karen haircut who's screaming at everybody at a school board meeting. Like, of the two people, I'm going to believe this person more than this person.
Right. And, with vaccines and the kids that just came out, we sat down with our pediatrician to talk about if we should get Evan vaccinated or not. She's obviously pro-vaccination. But part of it is like, we trust this woman who's an incredible doctor with everything related to our son. Why wouldn't we trust her with this?
Our pediatrician has been our kids' doctor since my oldest daughter, more than 20 years now. We're gonna keep going, and we're gonna trust her. Why would she steer us wrong? Why would all of a sudden now would she say, "Oh, I wanna help Pfizer's bottom line by sticking the needle in some ports," right? Like that's. I don't think that's happening. I just think that's absolutely ridiculous. And I wrote this column after the Jay Lundeen, everybody chanting whatever the hell they were chanting about me, and ports evil, ports terrible. I think what's happened is and it's so easy to blame everything on social media, but I can't really figure out another variable that is. And we know Facebook feeds us a steady diet of what we want to hear. Right. I mean, we had the Facebook whistleblower. She's testifying before Congress. We know it's a thing. We know what happens. Facebook creates an echo chamber, right? It's a nice warm bath of all the things that you already believe, just sort of. And I think the problem is people have come because Facebook permeates our society, right? It's everywhere. Like I can't at my school, like I'm supposed to get school notices through Facebook and everything now, right? Like it's everywhere. And because it's created that expectation, we want to take that bubble out into the real world. And I think what's driving a lot of them nuts is that, and I think they feel very betrayed by me because I'm a conservative, and they feel stabbed in the back because I'm just not going to tell them what they want to hear. They want to hear a certain thing, and I'm just not going to do it.
But I think beyond social media, we've also segregated ourselves through cable news, through talk radio, through who we spend time with. I mean, I just had a conversation with somebody yesterday about, conservatives and liberals are the same way. We only talk to people who we agree with. We only socialize with people who we agree with. So, this conversation was about, if you're a Democrat and you come across as rational, sometimes people are taken aback because their only connection with a Democrat is what they see on cable news or what they see on social media.
Well, it's going to be a firebrand like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And I mean, I don't obviously like a lot of what Alexandria AOC, whatever I don't like a lot of what she stands for, but also what their view of her is also being filtered through. This is not me defending AOC necessarily because I don't like her policies, but also it's filtered through so that it's only just the craziest or most bomb throwing aspects of it. And MSNBC does the same thing with every Republican is a plutocrat. Racist, whatever, and they're caricatures of each other, and that's what we're reacting to is caricatures of each side, and it's not reality.
That's very right. And you think about AOC, and I agree with some things, other things I don't agree with, but she's a really incredible story when you think about she was a bartender that took out a Democrat who'd been in office for 30 years.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's an incredible story.
Sarah Palin was also an incredible story when you look at how she climbed over a Republican establishment, but her treatment when she came on the national stage was much different than what AOC got. Not that we need to start that debate, but
yeah, I think that's probably fair.
All right, well that's it. We put in an hour and enjoy doing this. You and I are going to be doing this every week. On Wednesdays, we're going to record and then release it into the wild. And sometimes we're going to have guests too. As a matter of fact, I haven't told Chad this. I'm going to spring it on him. But next week, we're actually going to have Jason Borer on from the Lignite Energy Council. I don't know if you just saw it. He was in the Washington Post about these weirdos in the coal industry in North Dakota promoting electric cars. Which I think is kind of an interesting thing wherever, we're talking about energy and the balance. So we're going to have him on for a little while, and I'm sure we'll have some other fun stuff to talk about as well.
Well, I look forward to that conversation because I want people to know that not all Democrats hate coal. Some of us actually like.
And not all conservatives hate electric cars. I think they're cool. Yeah. It's not practical for me to own one. I can't afford to just have an electric car to have one. I need one that's going to get me where I need to go. And in North Dakota, they're not very practical for most North Dakotans. They're just not yet. I think they'll get there. They're just not yet.
Hey, Rob, before we go, just one last shout out to Dots Pretzels.
Yeah.
What a day.
I'm going to go buy some. Good for them. Good for them. In my household, we call them crack pretzels, right? Like it's not really a choice. It's an addiction. Like I can't.
So do you think if you buy them today, the profits still go to Velva and not to that big corporation that bought them out?
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a good thing. Well, hey, but more power to them, right? Like,
Amen.
I'm not taking a thing away.
Cool. Super
Awesome.
cool.
Awesome
All
story.
right.
Also, their product should probably be a controlled substance.
See you next week. God willing, the legislature will be done.
Yeah. Let's hope. Let's cross our fingers. Thanks, Chad.
All right, see ya.